Heard it said that there's two kinds of people in the world. Anyone heard that before? But how do you know who's who? Is it by the operating system on their phone, or whether they have a smartphone or not? Or how they set their alarm in the morning? Do they set it once, or do they plan on snoozing several times? Two kinds of people. There are two kinds of people, those who like to prevent sunburn and those who simply treat it when it happens. Or when you get a menu in a restaurant, there's some who look first at the description of the entree and some who look first at the price and to go from there. Is it how you slice your bread, or how you eat your corn on the cob, or how you dispense your toilet paper? And this is for our family. When you refuel your car, how well you keep things alive, how often you check your email. It said there are two kinds of people in the world: those who think there's two kinds of people in the world, and those who don't. We're going to be taking a look today again at the Sermon on the Mount, core teachings of Jesus, and Jesus helps get at this a little bit. How do we look at ourselves or compare ourselves to others? It has something about judging. We're going to be in chapter 7 of Matthew. So Jesus begins like this. He says, "Do not judge, so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. The measure you give is the measure you receive." Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye when you don't notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your neighbor, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when there's a log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye. Then you can see clearly, take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. It's not that there aren't differences among us, right? As we look at how we live, the choices that we make. Certainly, there's diversity among us, and diversity can be a beautiful, wonderful thing. We look at creation, it becomes pretty apparent that God likes diversity. He didn't say, "I'm going to make a bird, and all birds will look alike." He makes wonderful variety. When God created humans, He didn't make them all the same skin tone. There's wonderful variety and diversity among human beings. There are differences among us. And the ability to judge between one or another is not necessarily a bad thing. We need to be able to discern what is good, what is bad. We choose a path for our lives. Every day we have to make choices. I think what Jesus is getting at when he's talking about judging here is not that we don't discern differences, but that we don't condemn people because of those differences. I think that's what he means when he's talking about don't judge, is don't condemn someone simply because they're different. We get into trouble as soon as we start saying those kind of people, right? Whenever it becomes those kind of people, whether it's race or gender or religion or economic status or political affiliation, whatever we use to talk about those kind of people, then we start bridging from judging to condemning. To demonize someone simply because they hold an opinion different than us is where I believe we cross a line. And I'm guilty as anyone of that. The hardest people I have time not judging is judgy people. All right, it really pushes me to accept and recognize that there's a reason why people do what they do. Does God love homophobic, racist, misogynist, egotists? Of course. There's no one that is outside of God's love. But doesn't mean their behavior is okay. Right? Jesus, when he gives this Sermon on the Mount, he's creating a clear picture. This is God's intention for how we are to live with our neighbors, relationship between us. He calls it the kingdom of God. It's how things look when we align ourselves with God's will for our relationships with each other and with all creation, actually. So the question we ask when discerning what we are to do is not to ask first, how does this affect me? Or how do I put my interests before others? But to say, does this align with what Jesus has been talking about? The Sermon on the Mount, this path, this way of life. There's choices to be made, right? We face them all the time. Do I going to live my life in response to fear of those who are different than me, or do I live my life in response and to love, seeing the world the way that God sees the world? Well, Jesus goes on. He says this. He says, ask and it will be given to you. Search, you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. Everyone who asks receives. Everyone who searches finds. For everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. Is there anyone among you who, if your child asks for bread, would give them a stone? Or if a child asks for fish, would give them a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you. This is the law and the prophets. That last little bit, that line, in everything, do to others as you would have them do to you. We have a special name for that, right? We call it the Golden Rule. And it's not unique for Jesus or for Christians. It shows up in all the major religions have a similar saying as part of their core teachings. And I don't think this is an accident. It's very simple, but it's a powerful way. A preschooler can understand this. Treat others the way that you want to be treated. It's the core of much that is good in our world. I love this picture by Norman Rockwell. If there's a key to peace, to harmony in our world, it is, I think, understanding this concept of this treat others the way that you would want to be treated. It's a principle like Jesus was invoking when he was talking about judging. He says, judge others the way that you want to be judged, right? Do you want to be judged with harsh legalism or with mercy? He says, if that's the way you want to be judged, then that's the way we need to look at others as well. And when we see the life of Jesus unfold in the gospel, it's not just his words, but we see how he acts, how he lives his life out in terms of not a call to legalism, but to mercy again and again. In everything you do, do to others as you would have them do to you. This is the law and the prophets. Mercy fulfills the law. St. Francis. I like Francis. He's an interesting guy. I can't think of anyone in recent years who's done more to instill hope, the possibility of change. Remember, it was shortly after he began as Pope, a reporter had asked him about, is there a place for gay people in the church? Remember that? It was big in the news there. And he says, if a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge? I just shook the rafters. If the Pope can't judge, well then who can? He says, that's not my position to do that. There's interesting that a lot of Pope Francis's sayings have been collected into a book. And the title of the book is The Name of God is Mercy. That really describes Francis as he looks at the name of God is mercy. What might the world look like if mercy was the driving force behind our decisions? If it was mercy above self-interest? A little video picture of what that might look like.
wonderful world. Well, I see skies of blue and I see clouds of white and the brightness of day. I like the dark and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, singing, how do you do? They really say, I love you. I hear babies cry and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than we'll know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble melts like a lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where you'll find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. The dream that you dare to, why, oh, why can't I?
Works on a personal level, also on a global level. Power foundation for shaping our lives. Mercy. Jesus concludes his sermon with these words. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who builds his house on a rock. Rains fall, floods come, winds blow, they beat against the house, but it will not fall, because it has been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. The rains fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Now when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not as their scribes. Well, that was bits and pieces of the Sermon on the Mount. I had to skip over a bunch of it, but I encourage you to go back if you have time to read it as a whole. It's just a couple pages, but the core teachings of Jesus that focus, if we look at them, on this gift of mercy.